The Wonderware Historian Client Workbook is an add-in to Microsoft Excel that allows you to query your Wonderware Historian database and return the results in a spreadsheet without having any knowledge of the SQL language. The reports you create can be saved and run again anytime. Depending on your operating system, you will access the Historian Client Workbook in different ways. Here in my Metro UI, I have a tile configured for it. And here we go. Now maybe you're thinking, well, this is just Excel. And yes, it is, except now we have a new tab called Historian. And in this tab, we have all the tools that will allow us to create, save, and run our reports. So let's start exploring the different options. When I click on Connection Management, we get something familiar. We get the Server List Configuration dialog box. And here is where we configure the connection information to our different historian servers. This is a common component, meaning everything that we configure here will be available to all the other clients. We already have a connection configured to our local historian server, so we are going to use the same one and click Close. And since we are already connected to a historian server, we can go to the tag selection. And here the system gives us three options. So let's start with the first one, tag selection. And this looks pretty familiar as well. This is the tag picker rearrange. Here we have the servers pane, the tags pane, and the filter pane. And if we right-click anywhere in this dialog, we see the option to enable or disable the servers pane, the filter pane, and the use of hierarchical name. Notice that at the bottom of the tags list, we have the tabs for filtering. And if in the servers pane we expand the name of the historian server, we have also the public and private groups. So for example here, if I want tags coming from the InTouch application, I select the node where my InTouch application is running, and I want analogs. And now I can look for my reactor values. Here I have my React level and React temp. So you can use the Control key to select more than one. And before we click OK, notice that here on the bottom of the window, we have a new field called Select Cell Range to Insert Tags. And right now it says A1. Well, this is the cell A1. And this is where the names of those tags will be inserted. This is just looking for names, nothing else, no other information. So if you want to change it, you can click here on that underscore and select any other cell. For example, B1. I'll go back and click OK. So now here we have the React level and React temp tags listed. Now if I click on these cells, if I select them, notice that in the formula bar there is no formula. This is just a string, just the name of the tags. So basically the options under the tag selection buttons only allow us to select the tags and insert the names in the spreadsheet. If we select the second option, Summary Tag Selection, then I will only see summary tags. And if I select Event Snapshot Tag Selection, I will see only tags that are related to an event snapshot. And we have an example about that, and we will talk about that one later. So having the tags listed here, we can start looking into the Tag Configuration button. The options here are Tag Details and Analog Tag Alarm Limits. Basically, this is which kind of information I can retrieve for the tag, configuration information. If I select tag details, the system will bring all the configuration information for the tags. If I select analog tag alarm limits, it will bring the limit alarm information for that tag. So let's try with tag details. We get the tag details dialog box, step 1 of 3. So it's asking me which server is the data coming from, and which ones are the cells containing the tag names. Well, we want information about these two tags, so we select them both. And notice that the inserted reference has the name of the spreadsheet and the name of the cells. So we go back, click Next. Select the cell for output. In which cell do you want to see this information? Well, if I leave B1 as it is right now, it's going to override whatever I have already in B1, which is the name of my tag. So we are going to change it. And another way to change it is just clicking on the field and selecting the cell. So for example, here D1, and notice that the content of the field gets updated. So let's click Next. Select the query options. Which information do you want to retrieve? Description, raw value range, engineering units range, storage rate and type. Source tag and source server are for replicated tags. So we will leave those unchecked. Then we finish. And here we go. We have a table with the configuration information for my level and temp tags. Now let's try the second option. Analog tag alarm limits. Same thing, from which server is the data coming from? Where are the names of the tags? Well, I know that my React temp has some alarming configuration, so I will select just that one. Next. Where do you want this information displayed? I want it here on D5 and finish. And here we go. We have the React temp alarming information. There are two alarms defined, high and high, and the limit values are 100 and 180. Now, so far we have retrieved configuration information, but now we want to retrieve historical data, and that's what the next button will allow us to do. We go to tag values, and here we have 5 options. Live values, history values, aggregated values, summary system values, and event snapshot values. Let's start with live values. Why live values if we know we are retrieving data from a historical database? Well, here it refers to the last value that was saved for the tag. It's not exactly live data, but it's the last value that we have saved. To show you how this one works, I'm going to add another couple of tags here. So I will go to tag selection and add one of my valves, which is a discrete tag. And then again tag selection, and I will add a string, the sys string. Okay, so I want my data here. I will go to tag values, live values. Same thing as before, the server where the data is coming from, which cells contained the tag names. Now here we need to change that selection. Now notice what I'm gonna do. Let's say I selected this by mistake and I click next. The system is going to complain. It doesn't like empty cells for the tag names. So you should be careful because the message is a bit misleading. It doesn't say we have an empty cell. It just says that there is a problem and the tag is missing, or there is a problem accessing the server. So we click OK, we go back and change the selection to include only the cells where we have actual tag names. We click next. Here in the step 2 of 3, we have select cell for output. So D9 is OK. We click next. Here we have to select the query criteria, which data we want to display for these tags. We have tag name, date time. I'm going to include milliseconds, quality, and OPC quality. So we click finish. And here we have our live data. Notice that we have one timestamp and one value for each tag because it is the last value saved in the database. Now let's try again the same test, but this time, again, live values, same thing. This time I'm gonna uncheck this box, enter the results as an array formula. Click next, finish, and we get the same, well, except these ones are the updated values. My live data is updated, so the values are different. But if I click on my previous query, look at the formula bar. Here we have an actual formula where there is a function and there are parameters associated to that function. If I click here on the new query, these are not formulas, these are actual strings, actual values. I am not using any formula here. And we are going to see the implications of not having formulas later on. Now let's try with the second option, history values. Here we get the history values dialog box, step 1 of 4. In the first one, same thing, we select the server from where the data is coming from, then which cells contain the tag names, then we click next. Where do we want to display the data? I want it here. Enter the results as an array formula. We want that one checked. Next. Here on the step 3, we have 5 different tabs. So the first tab is the display options. And here we can check some of the values that can be retrieved from the database. So for example, if I want to include milliseconds, the quality, or the OPC quality, or the quality detail. If I click more, here we have a list of the retrieval options available to be displayed as well. In the second tab, Format, we have 2 retrieval options, Value-Based Criteria and Tag-Based Criteria. If we select Value-Based Criteria, that means that from the data that we are retrieving, we are going to evaluate an additional criteria on the value column. And we are going to apply some rules there to refine our query. If we select Tag-Based Criteria, we are going to apply that criteria specifically for my tag. So when we change these options, actually the Criteria tab is going to get updated. For Tag-Based Criteria, if we come to this tab, we have 4 different options that by default are disabled, where I can enter my tag names and I can decide, okay, I want to filter my data retrieved excluding values that are null. Or I can compare that tag with other values. So for example, here I can check my React level. Okay. And notice that it updated the units. I know it is in cubic meters, and I can change this operation to greater than, less than, and I can enter here a value and do that comparison and refine my query. Now, if I go back to Format and I change this to Value-Based Criteria, and I come back to Criteria tab, notice that this dialog changed. Now, it is not looking just for the tag name, but it's looking for the value in general. So I want my value to be greater than a specific value and maybe less than another specific value. Maybe you want to exclude the ones that are nulls, or maybe you want to check the quality of it. Now the criteria applicability refers to when these conditions are met, the first time they were true or no longer true, for example. Now if we go back here to the Format tab, notice that when we select value-based criteria, we have the option to select narrow format or wide format for the table. The next tab is Retrieval, and this one is pretty much the same that we had in the Historian Trend client. However, we don't have retrieval styles here. We have retrieval modes. So here we can select any of the available retrieval modes and customize it. Which one is the query row limit? If the retrieval mode we are using has cycles, then how do we define those cycles? By a number of cycles or by a size of the cycles. The interpolation type. Again, depending on the retrieval mode, we can change the interpolation type. And for the deadbands, if for example we are using here delta, we can select a time deadband or a value deadband. Then we have the Other tab. And in the Other tab, we can select the history version, latest or original, if we have any rules, if we have an state retrieval calculation to apply, and if we want any filtering, remove outliers, convert analog values to discrete, or snap to base value. The next tab is the Order. So after we retrieve the data, how do we want to display it? If we want to order it ascending or descending, in this case we have available the tag name, the value, and the date time. Those are the 3 values that we can use to sort the data. Okay, so we click Next. And here we have the step 4 to select the time range. We have 2 options, relative time and absolute time. Relative time is relative from now or today or from a specific date. It can be negative or positive, and it can be on seconds, minutes, hours, or days. If you select from a specific date, then you can select a specific time as well. For absolute time, the idea is that you are going to define a specific time range. So here you have the start date and time, and here you have the end date and time. The first option here is for when those start and end date and times are in one of your cells. So you can use those references. So I can select, for example, this cell is going to contain my start date and time, and this other cell is going to contain my end date and time. So that's how it's going to work. If I select the single value option, then whether you use a reference or you enter the date and time, the second box is going to be disabled, meaning you are not defining a range. You are just selecting a specific date and time. So we leave it as relative time, 10 minutes from now, and click Finish. And here we have our historical data. Let's start exploring the controls group. The first command we find is the refresh function. Now the refresh function will refresh the data for an array. What is an array? For example, when we inserted live data, all this was inserted, right? This block is what we call an array, and all the cells within that array contain formulas. So if I click on each of them, you can see that these ones are formulas. And when I click on the refresh function, if I had selected this function here, all the array where this formula belongs is going to be refreshed. So let's keep an eye on this specific array. I'm going to click on refresh function and notice that these values here are going to get updated. There you go. Now my history values, for example, which are also part of an array, they didn't get updated because it was out of the domain of the refresh function. If I want to refresh my whole page, every single function that I have in my worksheet, then I can click here on refresh sheet. And notice that my history data is going to get updated as well. There you go. Now this second array here was live data, but when we created it, we didn't check the box to enter the result as an array formula. We left this one unchecked. So here we don't have formulas. So what happens? When I click refresh everything, nothing gets updated. These ones are just plain values. We have the option to edit a function. So for example, this one here is a function. If I select edit function, the dialog for alarm values step 1 of 2 is going to display. And I can change here either the names of my tags or where the data should be displayed. Now what happens if we don't want this data to change ever? Well, we have the option to convert function to values. So notice here, these ones are functions. We have them there. Now, having one of these functions selected, I'm going to convert the function to values, and this command is going to affect my whole array. Remember that. So I'll click here, and now I go to my array, and none of the cells within that array have formulas anymore. All of them have been converted to values, meaning they will never ever change again. You can never ever refresh this data and update it again. Finally, we have the convert sheet to values, which does exactly the same, but in the whole worksheet.